Blood dripped from Abigail Sullivan's split lip as she staggered down the dusty main street of Yuma, Arizona, in the sweltering summer of 1875. Her wedding day finery torn and soiled, a bitter promise to herself forming with each painful step. She would never again believe in the illusion of a loving marriage. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Abigail pressed a handkerchief to her bleeding lip. 3 hours a bride, and already she bore the marks of her husband's temper. Gerald Thompson had seemed so charming during their brief courtship, the wealthy businessman from back east who'd swept into town and asked for her hand after just 2 weeks. Her father, seeing an opportunity to secure his daughter's future, had readily agreed. The wedding had been a rushed affair at the local church. Afterward, they'd gone to the hotel where Gerald had rented a suite. That was where his mask had slipped for the first time. When she'd expressed concern about leaving Yuma so quickly for his home in Chicago, his charming smile had vanished. His backhand had caught her completely by surprise. "You're my wife now," he'd snarled. "You'll do as you're told." Abigail had fled while he was downstairs arranging their travel, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter knowledge that she'd made a terrible mistake. Her parents' own troubled marriage should have warned her. Her father's harsh treatment of her mother had been the blueprint for what marriage meant: control, pain, and submission. The realization that she was now legally bound to Gerald sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She had nowhere to go. Her parents would only send her back to her husband, believing a wife's place was beside her spouse, no matter the circumstances. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. She stepped off the boardwalk, ducking into the narrow alley between the general store and the post office. Her heart pounded as she pressed herself against the rough wooden wall. Had Gerald already begun searching for her? "Miss, are you all right?" The deep voice startled her, and she whirled around to face a tall man whose broad shoulders nearly blocked the entrance to the alley. He wore trail-worn clothes, a dusty cowboy hat, and had concerned blue eyes fixed on her face. "I'm fine," she said automatically, even as her trembling hands betrayed her. The stranger's gaze dropped to her lip and his expression darkened. "You don't look fine to me, madam. It's nothing." Abigail turned away, embarrassed by her disheveled appearance and the evidence of violence on her face. "I don't mean to intrude, but—" He took a step closer, removing his hat. "I'm Riley Parker. Just rode into town with a cattle drive. If someone's hurt you, maybe I can help." "Nobody can help me," Abigail whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "I made my bed, as they say." Riley's expression remained steady, but something in his eyes softened. "My ma always said that's a foolish saying. Sometimes the bed's been made all wrong, and there ain't no shame in getting up and making it again." A shout from the street caused Abigail to flinch. "Abigail, where are you, you ungrateful woman?" Gerald's voice sent ice through her veins. Riley Parker's posture changed subtly, a tension running through his tall frame as he glanced over his shoulder toward the street. "That would be the fella who split your lip," she nodded, unable to speak through her fear. "Come with me," Riley said, his voice low and urgent. "My boss has a wagon headed out to his ranch today. You can hide there until we figure something out." "Why would you help me?" Abigail asked, bewildered by this stranger's offer. Riley settled his hat back on his head. "Because my pa taught me that a man who raises his hand to a woman is no man at all." For a moment, Abigail hesitated. Following this stranger could be another mistake, but Gerald's voice was growing closer and desperation won out. She nodded. Riley led her deeper into the alley, navigating the narrow passage until they emerged behind the buildings. A wagon loaded with supplies stood waiting, an older man at the reins. "Hank, this lady needs a ride out to the Circle P," Riley said. The weathered ranch hand looked Abigail over, his eyes lingering on her injured face before nodding without question. "Climb on in the back, miss. We'll cover you with that tarp." Riley helped her onto the wagon, his touch gentle on her elbow. "I'll be riding out with the rest of the boys in about an hour. When we get to the ranch, we'll sort things out." As the tarp settled over her, creating a stifling dark tent in the wagon bed, Abigail heard Gerald's voice again, closer now, demanding information from passers-by. She curled into herself, making her body as small as possible among the sacks of flour and beans. The wagon lurched forward, carrying her away from Yuma and into uncertainty. Abigail closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. She had no idea what awaited her at this Circle P ranch, but at least she was escaping Gerald Thompson. For now, the journey seemed to last forever. Beneath the tarp, heat built up until sweat soaked through Abigail's wedding dress, the fine fabric clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Each bump and jolt of the wagon sent pain through her bruised body. Gerald's violence hadn't been limited to just her face. When the wagon finally stopped, Hank's gruff voice called out, "Coast is clear, miss." Abigail pushed aside the tarp, blinking in the harsh sunlight. They had arrived at a sprawling ranch, the main house standing proud against the backdrop of desert and distant mountains. A woman in her 50s emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hank, who's this you've brought?" she called, approaching the wagon. "Riley sent her, Mrs. Pearson said she needed help." The woman's kind face creased with concern as she took in Abigail's appearance. "Oh, my dear, come inside right away." Martha Pearson, as she introduced herself, was the housekeeper for the Circle P ranch. She led Abigail into the house, straight to a bedroom that smelled of lavender and clean linens. "Let's get you out of that dress and into something comfortable," Martha said, already pulling out a simple cotton dress from a chest. "Then we'll tend to that lip of yours." "I don't understand why everyone is being so kind," Abigail said, her voice catching. "You don't even know me." Martha's expression softened. "Riley wouldn't have sent you here if you didn't need help. The Parkers have always been good judges of character." "The Parkers?" "This is the Parker Ranch. Circle P. Riley's father built it from nothing 30 years ago. When James passed last year, Riley took over. He was foreman of this cattle drive, bringing the herd back from selling in Texas." An hour later, Abigail sat at the kitchen table wearing a borrowed dress, her face cleaned and a cool compress pressed to her swollen lip. Martha had drawn her a bath and given her privacy to wash away the dust of her journey and the memory of Gerald's touch. The sound of horses approaching brought Martha to the window. "That'll be Riley and the boys," she said, moving to put coffee on. Riley entered the kitchen, hat in hand, boots leaving dusty prints on the floor Martha had clearly just swept. His eyes immediately found Abigail, assessing her condition with a concern that seemed genuine. "You're looking better," he said, offering a small smile. "Though I reckon that lip will be sore for a few days yet." "Thank you for helping me," Abigail said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise." Riley pulled out a chair across from her. "Mind telling me what happened? Who was that man?" Abigail's hands twisted in her lap. "My husband. We were married this morning." Riley's eyebrows shot up. "Married today, and he did that to you?" She nodded, shame washing through her. "Gerald Thompson. He's a businessman from Chicago. He wasn't like that during our courtship, but as soon as the ceremony was over." Her voice trailed off. "Men like that are good at hiding their true nature until they think they have ownership," Riley said, his voice hard with anger. "You don't need to be ashamed. He's the one who should be." Martha placed a cup of coffee in front of Riley. "What are we going to do?" "Her husband will likely come looking." "Let him," Riley said, his jaw tight. This is my land. He has no rights here. But legally, I'm his wife, Abigail whispered. The law is on his side. Riley took a slow sip of his coffee. The law's a funny thing out here. Sometimes it takes a while to catch up. He set the cup down decisively. You can stay here as long as you need to. We've got plenty of room and Martha could use the help. I can't impose. It's not imposing if you're working, Riley interrupted. Do you know how to cook? Yes, Abigail said. And so, I worked at the dressmakers in Yuma before I married. Good. Martha's been saying she needs another pair of hands, especially with Roundup coming. The men will need feeding and there's always mending to be done. Martha nodded enthusiastically. That would be wonderful. These cowboys tear through shirts like they're made of paper. Abigail felt a small spark of hope ignite in her chest. If you're sure. I'm sure, Riley said firmly. Now tell me everything you can about this husband of yours, what he looks like, what kind of man he is. I want to be prepared if he comes this way. As Abigail described Gerald his fine clothes, his Eastern manners that concealed a volatile temper, she watched Riley's expression grow increasingly grim. She realized the cowboy was taking her seriously, believing her without question. It was a novel experience. Her own father had always dismissed her mother's injuries as accidents or misunderstandings. He won't give up easily, Abigail concluded. He paid a significant amount for the wedding, and he told me he has business associates coming to meet his new wife in Chicago. Men like that see women as property, Riley said, standing up. But you're not property, Miss Sullivan. It's Mrs. Thompson now, she said bitterly. Not here, Riley replied firmly. Here, you're whoever you want to be. The next morning, Abigail woke at dawn, determined to earn her keep. She found Martha already at work in the kitchen, kneading dough for biscuits. Good morning, Abigail said, tying an apron around her waist. What can I do to help? Martha smiled warmly. You can start the coffee and then help me with breakfast. We feed 12 men during normal operations, more during Roundup. As they worked side by side, Martha told Abigail about the ranch and the people who called it home. Riley had taken over after his father's death, proving himself a fair and respected boss. The hands were loyal, many having worked for the Parkers for years. Riley never married? Abigail asked, trying to sound casual as she sliced bacon. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. No, there was a girl once, about 5 years ago. Lucy, the daughter of a rancher over in New Mexico Territory. They were sweet on each other, but she died of fever before they could marry. Hit Riley hard. He threw himself into ranch work after that. Abigail felt a pang of sympathy. That's terrible. It was. For a while I worried about him. But that's the way of life out here, harsh and unforgiving sometimes. You either bend with it or break. When the cowboys filed in for breakfast, Abigail kept her head down, aware of their curious glances. Riley entered last, nodding to her with a small smile that caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. After breakfast, as the men headed out for their day's work, Riley lingered behind. How are you feeling this morning? He asked. Better, Abigail said, touching her lip, which was still swollen but no longer bleeding. Thank you again for your kindness. It's nothing. He shifted, suddenly seeming uncomfortable. I've sent word to the sheriff in Yuma, letting him know you're here safe. Thought it best to get ahead of any story Thompson might spin. Fear spiked through her. Won't that tell him where I am? Sheriff Briggs is a good man. He knows my father saved his life once during an Apache raid. He'll be discreet. Riley paused, his blue eyes serious. But we should be prepared for Thompson to figure it out eventually. Yuma's not that big and people talk. Abigail nodded, her momentary sense of security evaporating. What will happen when he does? We'll deal with that when it comes. For now, you're safe here. Riley settled his hat on his head. I need to head out, got cattle to move to the north pasture, but if you need anything, Martha knows how to find me. Days passed, settling into a routine. Abigail threw herself into work, helping Martha with cooking, cleaning, and mending. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, leaving little time for worry. Her bruises faded, and with them, some of the raw fear that had gripped her since fleeing Gerald. The ranch hands, initially curious about the mysterious woman who'd appeared in their midst, soon accepted her presence without question. They were polite, removing their hats when they spoke to her and thanking her for the meals she prepared. Riley remained a steady, reassuring presence. He didn't ask her about Gerald again, but she often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was something in his gaze that made her feel both seen and protected, a combination she'd never experienced before. One evening, after the hands had finished supper and retreated to the bunkhouse, Riley invited Abigail to join him on the porch. The Arizona sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. "You've settled in well," he said, leaning against the porch rail. "Martha says you're a godsend in the kitchen." Abigail smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I enjoy the work. It feels good to be useful. You were a dressmaker before." "I worked for Mrs. Halloway at her shop in Yuma, yes. My mother taught me to sew when I was young." Abigail hesitated, then added, "It was my only skill that my father approved of. He thought education was wasted on girls." Riley's expression darkened slightly. "Your father sounds like he and Thompson would get along just fine." "They did," Abigail confirmed. "My father was so pleased when Gerald showed interest in me. A businessman from Chicago was quite the catch for a dressmaker's assistant." "How long did you know him before you married?" 2 weeks, Abigail admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "It sounds foolish now." "Not foolish," Riley said gently, "just trusting. There's a difference." They fell silent, watching the sunset deepen. Abigail became acutely aware of Riley's presence beside her, the clean scent of soap mingling with leather and horses, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his calloused hands rested on the porch rail. "I've been thinking," Riley said finally, "about your situation." Abigail tensed, waiting for him to say she needed to move on, that harboring her was becoming too dangerous. "There's a lawyer in Tucson who helped my father with some legal matters years ago. I'm thinking of riding out to see him, ask about your options." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "Options? For ending your marriage," Riley said simply. "It won't be easy. Divorce isn't common, especially for women. But if Thompson hurt you, there might be grounds." Abigail's breath caught. The idea of legally freeing herself from Gerald had seemed impossible. "Would a court really grant a divorce based on my word alone?" "I don't know," Riley admitted. "That's why I want to talk to Nathaniel Morris. He knows the law better than anyone in the territory." "When would you go?" "Tomorrow, if that's all right with you." "It's a 2-day ride each way, so I'd be gone about 5 days total." Concern replaced Abigail's hope. "What if Gerald comes while you're gone?" Riley's expression hardened. "My foreman, Sam, knows the situation. He and the boys will make sure you're safe. No one's going to hurt you here, Abigail." "I promise you that." The sound of her name on his lips sent a strange warmth through her. It was the first time he'd called her anything but Miss Sullivan. "Thank you, Riley," she said softly, "for everything." He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intent in the fading light. "You don't need to thank me for treating you like a human being deserving of respect, Abigail. That should be the baseline, not something exceptional." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of feelings developing beyond simple kindness and gratitude. Abigail looked away first, her heart hammering in her chest. I should help Martha with the dishes, she murmured. Riley nodded, stepping back. Of course. Rest well, Abigail. I'll head out at first light. That night, Abigail lay awake long after the ranch had gone quiet, thinking about Riley Parker. He was unlike any man she'd ever known, strong but gentle, confident without being controlling. The idea of him riding all the way to Tucson, just to help her, filled her with emotions she couldn't quite name. It was dangerous, she knew, to let herself feel anything for Riley. Her judgment when it came to men had already proven disastrous once. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, it was his kind blue eyes she saw in her mind's darkness. The next morning, Abigail rose before dawn to prepare a travel pack for Riley. She filled it with biscuits, jerky, and a small jar of preserves Martha had put up the previous summer. When Riley entered the kitchen, his travel gear already assembled, surprise registered on his face at the sight of Abigail waiting. "You didn't need to get up so early," he said, accepting the food pack with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I wanted to," Abigail replied simply. "Be careful on the trail." Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary. Riley nodded, his expression softening. "I will. And you stay close to the house while I'm gone. If Thompson shows up, I'll go straight to Sam," Abigail finished. "I remember." With a final nod, Riley left. Abigail watched from the kitchen window as he mounted his horse and rode away, a silhouette against the lightening eastern sky. A strange emptiness settled in her chest as he disappeared from view. The first 2 days of Riley's absence passed uneventfully. Abigail kept busy with her chores, helping Martha prepare for the upcoming cattle drive that would take most of the hands away from the ranch for several weeks. They baked extra bread, made jerky, and packed supplies that would travel with the chuck wagon. On the 3rd day, trouble arrived. Abigail was hanging laundry in the yard when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. 3 riders were coming up the long drive to the ranch house. Her hands froze on the damp shirt she was pinning to the line. As recognition struck her, the man in the lead was Gerald Thompson. Fear paralyzed her for a precious second before instinct took over. She dropped the laundry and ran for the house, calling Martha's name as she burst through the door. "He's here," Abigail gasped. "Gerald, with 2 other men." Martha's face paled, but she moved with decisive efficiency, grabbing a rifle from above the fireplace. "Go get Sam and the boys. They're in the north corral." Abigail ran out the back door, her heart pounding as she raced toward the corral where Sam and 3 other hands were working with the horses. She had barely begun explaining when the sound of hoofbeats approached the yard. Sam's weathered face hardened. "Get back to the house, Miss Sullivan. Stay with Martha. We'll handle this." By the time Abigail returned to the house, Gerald and his companions had dismounted. She watched through the window as Sam and the ranch hands intercepted them, preventing them from approaching the house. "I'm looking for my wife," Gerald's voice carried clearly in the still afternoon air. "Abigail Thompson, I know she's here." "Don't know anyone by that name," Sam replied evenly, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "This is private property, Parker Ranch. You're not welcome here." Gerald's face contorted with anger. "Don't lie to me, Cowboy. People in Yuma saw Riley Parker help her. I want my wife, and I'm not leaving without her." "You'll have to take that up with Mr. Parker," Sam said. "He's not here right now." "Convenient," Gerald sneered. "Well, I'll just wait for his return then." "You'll wait in Yuma," one of the other hands said, stepping forward. "Not here." The tension in the yard was palpable. Abigail's hands trembled as she watched the standoff, terrified it would erupt into violence. Gerald's companions had their hands hovering near their weapons, and the ranch hands had shifted subtly to defensive positions. Gerald's eyes scanned the yard, landing on the house. For a heart-stopping moment, Abigail thought he'd seen her at the window, but his gaze moved on. "Tell Parker I'll be back," Gerald finally said, his voice cold with fury. "And tell my wife that running away only makes things worse for her. Much worse." He and his men mounted up, but before riding away, Gerald called out, "Oh, and you can let Abigail know that I've spoken with the sheriff. Harboring a married woman against her husband's wishes is against the law. Parker will face charges if he doesn't return her to me." Abigail sank to the floor beneath the window, her legs too weak to support her. Martha knelt beside her, wrapping a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Don't you worry," the older woman said firmly. "Riley won't let that man take you. None of us will." But as the day wore on, Abigail's anxiety only grew. What if Gerald was right about the law? What if Riley was arrested for helping her? The guilt of potentially causing trouble for everyone who'd shown her kindness was overwhelming. By nightfall, she'd made a decision. She would leave before Riley returned. It was the only way to ensure he and the others wouldn't suffer for their kindness. She could make her way to California, perhaps, where Gerald would have a harder time finding her. Late that night, after Martha had gone to bed, Abigail packed a small bundle of belongings, the dress Martha had given her, some food from the kitchen, and the small amount of money she'd had in her pocket when she fled her wedding. She wrote a note explaining her decision and thanking Riley and Martha for everything they'd done. Just as she was preparing to slip out, a commotion outside caught her attention. Men's voices, the sound of horses but not threatening. Familiar. Riley had returned 2 days earlier than expected. Abigail froze, uncertain what to do. Her escape plan was now impossible, at least for tonight. She quickly hid her packed bundle and the note, then moved to the kitchen where she could hear Riley speaking with Sam. "Came looking for her today," Sam was saying. 3 of them, led by Thompson himself. Got pretty heated, but they left without trouble. "Did he threaten her?" Riley's voice was tight with anger. "Said he'd spoken to the sheriff. Claims the law's on his side about taking his wife back." "Well, the law's about to disappoint him," Riley said, his boots sounding on the porch steps. "Morris says there are grounds for divorce given the violence. It won't be easy, but it's possible." Abigail's heart leapt at his words. Could it really be true? Could she legally free herself from Gerald? The kitchen door opened and Riley stepped inside, stopping short when he saw her standing there. His face was wind-burned from hard riding, fatigue evident in the set of his shoulders, but his eyes brightened at the sight of her. "Abigail," he said simply, "are you all right?" She nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Riley crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, surprising her by taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, calloused from ranch work, but incredibly gentle. "I heard Thompson came looking for you. I'm sorry I wasn't here." "Your men handled it," Abigail managed to say. "But Gerald said—" "I know what he said, and it's not entirely true," Riley interrupted. "I spoke with Sheriff Briggs in Tucson. He confirmed what Morris told me: a husband doesn't have absolute rights over his wife, especially if he's abusive." Hope fluttered in Abigail's chest, but she tamped it down. "What does that mean exactly?" Riley squeezed her hands lightly. "It means you have options. Morris is willing to represent you if you want to file for divorce on grounds of cruelty. It won't be easy. We'd need witnesses, evidence." "But it's possible." "Evidence?" Abigail echoed, her hope faltering. "My bruises have healed. I have no proof of what Gerald did." "We have my testimony of your condition the day I found you," Riley said, "and Martha's regarding your injuries." "Morris thinks it might be enough, especially with Thompson's reputation. Apparently he's known for his temper in Chicago business circles." Abigail's mind whirled with this new information. "He'll fight it. Gerald doesn't like to lose. Let him fight, Riley said, his voice hardening. We'll fight harder. The word "we" settled over Abigail like a warm blanket. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt a genuine sense of hope, but it was quickly tempered by reality. What about until then? She asked. Gerald knows I'm here now. He'll come back, maybe with more men next time. Riley's jaw tightened. I've thought about that. Morris suggested we file the divorce petition immediately, which would establish legal proceedings. Once that's done, Thompson would be on shaky ground trying to forcibly reclaim you. How long would the process take? Months, most likely, Riley admitted. But Morris is sending papers for you to sign. Once they're filed in Tucson, you'll have legal standing. Abigail withdrew her hands from Riley's, wrapping her arms around herself. I can't stay here that long, putting you and your ranch at risk. Gerald is not a man who gives up easily. I'm not asking you to leave, Abigail, Riley said, his voice softening. This is your decision, but know that you have a place here for as long as you need it. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that had been growing since that first day in Yuma. Abigail felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Riley nodded, breaking the moment. You should get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. That night, Abigail lay awake thinking about her options. The possibility of divorce gave her hope, but the road ahead would be difficult and dangerous. Gerald would not surrender easily. And then there was Riley Parker, the cowboy who'd ridden for days just to help her, whose gentle touch made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She thought of the bundle she'd packed, the escape plan she'd been ready to execute. Running away would certainly be simpler than fighting Gerald through the courts. But was simple the same as right by morning? She'd made her decision. She would stay and fight for her freedom. Not just because of Riley, though he was certainly part of the equation, but because running would mean Gerald won. She was tired of men like him winning. When she entered the kitchen at dawn, Riley was already there, nursing a cup of coffee. His face lit up at the sight of her, then quickly sobered as he noted her determined expression. I want to file for divorce, Abigail said without preamble. I'm tired of being afraid. I want my life back. Riley's slow smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Morris sent the papers with me. They're in my saddlebag. What do I need to do? Sign them, and I'll have one of the boys ride them back to Tucson today. Morris will file them immediately. And then we wait, Riley said, and we prepare. Thompson isn't going to take this lying down. I know, Abigail said, her voice steadier than she felt. But neither am I. The weeks that followed tested Abigail's resolve in ways she couldn't have anticipated. 3 days after the papers were sent to Tucson, a letter arrived from the sheriff of Yuma. Gerald Thompson had filed a complaint, accusing Riley Parker of alienation of affection and kidnapping. It's nonsense, Riley said after reading the letter, though his expression was grim. Sheriff Briggs knows that. But it could still cause trouble, Abigail said, guilt washing over her. I never meant to bring this kind of problem to your door. Riley's hand found hers across the kitchen table. You didn't bring anything, Abigail. I chose to help you. I'd make the same choice again. His touch lingered, warm and reassuring. Abigail found herself reluctant to pull away, even when Martha entered the kitchen with a basket of vegetables from the garden. The older woman's knowing smile suggested she'd noticed the moment between them, but she said nothing, simply moving to the stove to begin preparing lunch. As predicted, Gerald returned to the Circle P a week later, this time with the sheriff of Yuma in tow. Abigail watched from the window as Riley met them in the yard, standing tall and unintimidated. Mr. Parker, the sheriff said, removing his hat. "I'm here on official business. Mr. Thompson has filed a complaint against you for harboring his wife against her will. Mrs. Thompson is here of her own accord," Riley replied evenly. "And proceedings for divorce have already been filed in Tucson on grounds of cruelty." Gerald's face mottled with rage. "That's a lie. My wife has no grounds for divorce. She's being influenced by you, Parker." "Why don't we ask her directly?" Riley suggested, his voice level despite the tension evident in his posture. "Sheriff, would that satisfy you?" The sheriff, a portly man with a bushy mustache, looked uncomfortable. "I suppose that would be appropriate." Riley turned toward the house and called, "Abigail, would you come out here, please?" Heart pounding, Abigail stepped onto the porch. The sight of Gerald standing there, his face contorted with barely contained fury, sent a shiver of fear through her. But Riley's solid presence gave her strength. "Mrs. Thompson," the sheriff began, "your husband claims you're being held here against your will. Is that the case?" Abigail lifted her chin, meeting Gerald's gaze directly. "No, Sheriff. I came here willingly after my husband struck me on our wedding day. I've remained by choice." "She's lying." Gerald snarled, taking a step forward. Riley shifted subtly, placing himself between Gerald and the porch. "She's always been prone to hysteria and fabrication. Ask her father if you don't believe me." "I have filed for divorce," Abigail continued, her voice growing stronger. "The papers have been submitted in Tucson. Until that process is complete, I choose to remain here where I feel safe." The sheriff looked between them, clearly reluctant to be involved in a domestic dispute. "Mr. Thompson, if divorce proceedings have been filed, there's little I can do. The courts will have to sort this out." "This is outrageous," Gerald exploded. "She's my wife. I have rights." "Not the right to beat her," Riley said quietly, but with such intensity that even Gerald fell silent. "Not ever." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Unless Mrs. Thompson wants to return with you voluntarily, Mr. Thompson, my hands are tied. This is a civil matter now, not criminal." Gerald's eyes found Abigail's, his gaze promising retribution. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Not by a long shot." As Gerald and the sheriff rode away, Abigail's legs gave out. She sank onto the porch steps, trembling with the aftermath of confrontation. Riley sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him but not touching. "You were brave," he said simply. Abigail shook her head. "I was terrified." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Riley said. "It means you do what's right despite the fear." She looked at him then, really looked at the man who'd become her protector and friend over these weeks. The sun had burnished his skin to a deep tan, lines crinkling at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into desert brightness. His hands, resting on his thighs, were strong and capable. But it was the kindness in his blue eyes that undid her, a kindness she'd never expected to find in a world that had shown her so much cruelty. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind since that first day in Yuma. Riley was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turning toward the distant mountains. "My mother," he finally said. "My father wasn't always a good man. When I was young, he drank heavily. He never hit her, but the words he used, they could cut deeper than any knife." Abigail listened, understanding dawning. "One day, when I was about 12, she'd had enough, packed us both up and left. We stayed with her sister in Santa Fe for nearly a year." Riley's voice grew softer with memory. "My father came looking for us eventually. He'd sobered up, realized what he'd lost. He begged her to come back, promised things would be different." "And were they?" Abigail asked. Riley nodded. "He kept his word, never touched another drop, became the man she deserved, the father I needed." But it was her courage that changed him, her willingness to walk away rather than accept mistreatment. He turned to face Abigail, his expression earnest. "When I saw you in that alley in Yuma, with your lip bleeding and that look in your eyes, I saw my mother. The difference is, your husband didn't just use cruel words, and men who use their fists rarely change their ways." Abigail absorbed his words, touched by his honesty. "Your mother was fortunate that your father could change." "She was," Riley agreed. "But she didn't know that would happen when she left. She just knew she deserved better. So do you, Abigail." Without thinking, Abigail reached for his hand, her fingers twining with his. It was the first time she had initiated contact between them. Riley's hand tightened around hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. They sat together as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, hands linked, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger in the shared silence. The following weeks brought a flurry of legal correspondence. Gerald's lawyer sent threatening letters demanding Abigail's return. Nathaniel Morris responded with firm legal arguments supporting the divorce petition. The sheriff of Yuma washed his hands of the matter entirely, declaring it outside his jurisdiction now that the courts were involved. Through it all, life at the Circle P continued. Abigail settled into her role, helping Martha with household duties and taking over much of the cooking for the ranch hands. She discovered an unexpected talent for ranch accounts, her neat handwriting and quick mind making short work of the ledgers that Riley had been neglecting. "You're making yourself indispensable," Riley teased one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset. It had become their habit to share this quiet time together, a respite at the end of busy days. "Is that a bad thing?" Abigail asked, smiling. "Not at all," Riley replied, his voice softening. "In fact, I'm starting to wonder how we managed before you came." The warmth in his eyes made Abigail's heart skip. These moments with Riley had become precious to her, the easy conversation, the comfortable silences, the occasional brush of hands that sent electricity through her veins. But always, the shadow of Gerald Thompson loomed. Every rider approaching the ranch caused Abigail's heart to race with fear until their identity was confirmed. Every letter from Tucson was opened with trembling fingers. In late July, a telegram arrived from Nathaniel Morris. The divorce proceedings had hit a snag. Gerald was claiming that Abigail had abandoned the marital home without cause, that any injuries she sustained were the result of her own clumsiness. Without more substantial evidence or witnesses, the case might drag on for months, possibly years. "We need more," Riley said, pacing the kitchen after reading the telegram. "Something concrete that proves what kind of man he is." "There's nothing," Abigail said, despair washing over her. "It was just the two of us in that hotel room. No one saw what happened." Martha, who had been listening silently, suddenly spoke up. "What about his business associates in Chicago? You mentioned he had a reputation for his temper." Riley stopped pacing. "That's it. If we could find others who have witnessed his violent behavior." "But how?" Abigail asked. "Chicago is so far away." "I have a friend," Riley said slowly, "a cattle buyer from Chicago. He comes through Arizona twice a year. He might know something or know someone who does." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "When will you see him next?" "That's the thing," Riley said, his expression troubled. "He'll be in Prescott next week for the cattle auction. I was planning to take some of our stock there to sell." "But you can't leave the ranch," Abigail finished his thought. With Gerald still threatening legal action, Riley's absence could be dangerous. "Sam could handle the sale," Riley said, thinking aloud, "but he wouldn't know what questions to ask about Thompson." Abigail took a deep breath. "Then I'll go." Riley and Martha both stared at her in surprise. "Absolutely not," Riley said immediately. "It's too dangerous. Thompson could be watching for any opportunity to find you alone." "I wouldn't be alone," Abigail countered. "I'd be with Sam and the other hands, and Gerald would never expect me to leave the safety of the ranch. He'd be watching here, not in Prescott." "It's still too risky," Riley insisted. Abigail stood, facing him with newfound determination. "This is my fight, Riley. I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I can't hide behind you forever. If there's a chance to find evidence against Gerald, I need to take it." Riley's expression softened. "Your courage continues to amaze me, Abigail Sullivan, but I can't let you put yourself in danger." "You can't let me," Abigail repeated, an edge entering her voice. "Isn't that exactly the kind of thinking we're fighting against? Men deciding what women can and cannot do?" Riley looked stricken. "That's not what I meant." "I know," Abigail said, her tone gentling. "But this is my decision to make. You've given me safety and support to find my strength again. Now I need to use it." A tense silence filled the kitchen. Martha busied herself at the stove, tactfully giving them space to resolve their disagreement. Finally, Riley sighed. "If you're determined to go, then I'm coming with you." "The ranch, Sam can manage for a week," Riley interrupted. "This is more important." The conviction in his voice warmed Abigail from within. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet," Riley warned. "Prescott will be full of strangers for the cattle auction. It could still be dangerous." "I know," Abigail acknowledged. "But doing nothing is more dangerous in the long run." Riley's gaze held hers, a mixture of concern and admiration in his blue eyes. "We'll leave in 2 days. That should give us time to prepare." The journey to Prescott took 3 days of hard riding. Abigail, who had limited experience on horseback, found muscles she didn't know she possessed aching by the end of each day. But she never complained, determined to prove to Riley and to herself that she was strong enough for this mission. They traveled with 4 ranch hands, including Sam, driving a small herd of cattle to sell at the auction. The men were protective of Abigail, forming a buffer between her and the curious stares they encountered at each stop along the way. Riley remained vigilant throughout the journey, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of threat. At night, when they camped under the stars, he made sure his bedroll was positioned protectively near Abigail's. On the second night, as they sat by the campfire after the others had turned in, Abigail found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "What happens after?" she said quietly, watching the flames dance. "If we find evidence against Gerald, if the divorce is granted, what then?" Riley poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. "What do you want to happen, Abigail?" It was a simple question, but the answer was anything but simple. Abigail had been so focused on escaping Gerald that she'd given little thought to what freedom might actually look like. "I don't know," she admitted. "I never expected to have choices." Riley was quiet for a long moment. "You could stay at the Circle P," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "Martha loves having you there, and you've proven yourself valuable to the ranch." "As an employee?" Abigail asked, her heart beating faster. Riley's eyes met hers across the fire, the flames reflecting in their blue depths. "If that's what you want." The unspoken alternative hung in the air between them, too fragile to be voiced just yet. Abigail looked away, overwhelmed by the possibilities. "Let's see what happens in Prescott first," she said softly. "One step at a time." Riley nodded, understanding in his gaze. "One step at a time." Prescott was bustling with activity when they arrived, the cattle auction having drawn ranchers and buyers from across the territory. Riley secured rooms at a modest hotel near the auction grounds, one for Abigail and one for himself, with the ranch hands staying in the bunkhouse provided for drovers. James Hutchinson usually stays at the Arizona house when he's in town, Riley told Abigail as they ate a late lunch in the hotel's small dining room. He's the cattle buyer I mentioned. If he's already arrived, we might find him there this evening. What will you tell him? Abigail asked, nervously pushing food around her plate. About why we're asking about Gerald, the truth, Riley said simply. Hutchinson is a good man. He values honesty. That evening they made their way to the Arizona house, the finest hotel in Prescott. The lobby was filled with well-dressed businessmen, many smoking cigars and discussing cattle prices. Abigail felt conspicuous in her simple dress, but Riley moved with confidence, scanning the room until he spotted a portly man with mutton chop whiskers. James. He called, crossing the room with Abigail at his side. Hutchinson turned, his face breaking into a broad smile. Riley Parker, I didn't expect to see you here. Thought you usually sent your foreman to the auctions. The men shook hands warmly. Riley introduced Abigail simply as Miss Sullivan, a friend from the ranch, without elaborating on her situation. A pleasure, Miss Sullivan, Hutchinson said, tipping his head politely. Any friend of Riley's is a friend of mine. James, we need to speak with you privately, Riley said, his voice low. It's important. Sensing the seriousness of the request, Hutchinson nodded. There's a private parlor upstairs. We can talk there. Once seated in the parlor with the door closed, Riley explained the situation succinctly: Abigail's marriage to Gerald Thompson, the violence that had occurred, and their need for evidence to support the divorce petition. Hutchinson's jovial expression had faded to one of grave concern by the time Riley finished. Thompson, he repeated, shaking his head. I know of him. Imports luxury goods from Europe, has offices on Michigan Avenue. Hope surged in Abigail. You know him? Not personally, Hutchinson clarified. But his reputation precedes him in certain circles. He's known for being ruthless in business dealings. There was talk a few years back about a secretary who left his employ suddenly, with a broken arm and bruised face. Abigail felt sick. There were others before me. I'm afraid that's likely, Hutchinson said sympathetically. Men like that rarely change their stripes. Riley leaned forward, intent. Would you be willing to provide a statement about what you've heard? It might help Abigail's case if we can establish a pattern of behavior. I'll do better than that, Hutchinson said decisively. There's a lawyer here in Prescott for the auction, Charles Whitaker. He represents several Chicago businesses, including mine. He moves in the same circles as Thompson and might know more details. I can arrange a meeting tomorrow. Relief washed over Abigail. Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. You can't know what this means to me. Hutchinson's kind eyes met hers. My own sister was married to a brute once. No one believed her when she tried to leave him. I believe you, Miss Sullivan. The next morning, Abigail and Riley met with Charles Whitaker in his temporary office near the courthouse. The lawyer, a precise man with gold-rimmed spectacles, listened carefully to their story. Thompson, he mused when they had finished. Yes, I'm familiar with the name. He's had legal troubles before, though they were quietly settled. What kind of troubles? Riley asked. Allegations from female employees. 2 that I know of. Whitaker adjusted his spectacles. And there was an incident with his first wife as well. Abigail's head snapped up. First wife. Gerald told me he'd never been married before. Whitaker's eyebrows rose. Interesting that he would conceal that. Elizabeth Harrington was from a prominent Chicago family. The marriage lasted less than a year. There were rumors of abuse, but her family had it handled discreetly. She returned to her maiden name afterward. Is there any way to contact her? Abigail asked, hope blooming in her chest. Her testimony could be crucial. I believe she moved to Boston after the divorce, Whitaker said. I can make inquiries if you wish. Please, Riley said firmly. And would you be willing to provide a formal statement about Thompson's reputation and these previous incidents? It could significantly strengthen Abigail's case. Whitaker considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll draft something today. It's not direct evidence, but establishing character is important in these cases. As they left Whitaker's office, Abigail felt lighter than she had in months. We might actually succeed, she said wonderingly. Riley squeezed her hand. I never doubted it. They spent the remainder of the day at the cattle auction, where Sam successfully sold the Circle P herd for a better price than expected. The celebration dinner that evening at the hotel was the first time Abigail had truly relaxed since fleeing her wedding day. As she looked around the table at Riley and the ranch hands who had become like family to her, a wave of gratitude washed over her. These men had protected her, believed her, respected her. It was so different from everything she'd been taught to expect from men. Her gaze lingered on Riley, who was laughing at something Sam had said. In the warm lamplight, his face was relaxed, the worry lines that had become familiar over the past weeks momentarily erased. When he turned and caught her watching him, his smile softened, became something intimate and warm that made her heart race. Later, as the others drifted off to their rooms, Riley walked Abigail to her door. They lingered in the hallway, reluctant to end the evening. Thank you for believing in me, Abigail said softly, for fighting alongside me. Riley's hand came up to gently touch her cheek, a feather-light caress that sent warmth cascading through her. You're the one doing the fighting, Abigail. I'm just honored to witness your strength. The tenderness in his eyes made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Riley bent his head toward hers. Abigail's eyes fluttered closed as his lips touched hers, a gentle, questioning kiss that spoke of respect and admiration as much as desire. When they parted, Abigail kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation so different from Gerald's demanding, possessive kisses. When she opened them, Riley was watching her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted quietly. But I didn't want you to think I expected anything from you. Your freedom, your choices, they're what matter most. Abigail's heart swelled at his words. You've shown me what it means to be respected, Riley. What it means to be valued for who I am, not what I can give. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Get some rest. Tomorrow we head back to the ranch with good news. But good news wasn't all that awaited them in Prescott the next morning. As they prepared to depart, a telegram arrived for Riley. His face darkened as he read it. What is it? Abigail asked, fear clutching at her heart. Thompson, Riley said grimly. He came to the ranch again with men. Sam's wife managed to get to town and send this. They're looking for you. Terror washed over Abigail. Martha, is she all right? The telegram doesn't say, Riley said, already moving toward the stables. But we need to get back now. The return journey was grueling, pushing both horses and riders to their limits. They traveled from dawn until well after dusk, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Abigail's fear for Martha and the others drove her through exhaustion and saddle soreness. As they approached the Circle P on the afternoon of the third day, Riley held up his hand, signaling a halt. Something's wrong, he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant ranch buildings. Even from a distance, Abigail could see what had caught his attention. There was no movement around the ranch, no hands working, no smoke from the chimney. The place appeared deserted. It could be a trap, Sam said, his hand moving to his pistol. Riley nodded grimly. Sam, you and Jake circle around to the back. Tom, approach from the east. I'll take Abigail straight in. If there's trouble, get her out safely." The men nodded, breaking off to approach the ranch from different directions. Riley turned to Abigail, his expression grave. "Stay close to me," he said. "If I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back." Abigail nodded, fear a cold knot in her stomach. They approached slowly, alert for any movement. The silence was unnerving, no dogs barking, no chickens scratching in the yard. As they reached the main house, Riley dismounted, helping Abigail down before drawing his pistol. "Stay behind me," he murmured, approaching the porch steps. The front door stood partially open. Riley pushed it wider with his boot, gun at the ready. "Martha," he called. "It's Riley and Abigail." A shuffling sound came from inside, then Martha appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "Riley, thank the Lord you're back." Relief flooded through Abigail as she rushed forward to embrace the older woman. "Are you all right? What happened?" Martha led them inside, checking the yard nervously before closing the door behind them. "Thompson came with 5 men, all armed. They demanded to know where you were." "Did they hurt you?" Riley asked, his voice tight with anger. Martha shook her head. "They threatened, but didn't lay a hand on me. The boys were out working the north pasture. By the time they got back, Thompson and his men had searched the house and were getting ready to leave." "Where are they now?" Abigail asked, looking around the unnaturally quiet house. "Gone for now," Martha said. "But Thompson left a message. Said he knew you'd gone to Prescott, that he had men watching there too. Said he'd be back, and next time he wouldn't leave empty-handed." Riley's jaw tightened. "Did he say when?" "No, but he can't have gone far," Martha said. "My guess is they're staying in Yuma, waiting for word from his men in Prescott." As if on cue, Sam appeared at the back door. "Place is clear," he reported. "But they made a mess of the bunkhouse and someone took a shot at the chicken coop. Killed 3 of our best layers." "Intimidation," Riley said grimly. "He's trying to scare us." "It's working," Abigail admitted, her voice small. "What do we do now?" Riley holstered his pistol, his expression resolute. "We finish what we started." "Sam, send a rider to Tucson immediately with the statements from Whitaker and Hutchinson. We need to get them to Morris as soon as possible." "And in the meantime?" Martha asked. "In the meantime, we prepare," Riley said, moving to the window to scan the yard. "Thompson will be back and we'll be ready." That night, with extra men posted as guards around the ranch, Abigail found it impossible to sleep. Every sound made her start, imagining Gerald and his men returning under cover of darkness. Eventually, she gave up, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and making her way to the kitchen for a cup of tea. She found Riley already there, sitting at the table cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, a tired smile crossing his face. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Abigail shook her head, moving to the stove to heat water. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Gerald's face." Riley set down the gun, watching her movements. "I won't let him hurt you, Abigail. I promise you that." She turned to face him, the fear she'd been holding at bay suddenly overwhelming her. "What if someone else gets hurt because of me? Martha, one of the hands. You." Her voice broke on the last word. In 2 strides, Riley was beside her, pulling her into his arms. Abigail went willingly, burying her face against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "This isn't your fault," Riley said firmly, his hand stroking her hair. "The only person responsible for this situation is Gerald Thompson." Abigail's arms tightened around his waist. "I'm so tired of being afraid." Riley pulled back slightly, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "Then let's end it. No more running, no more hiding. When Thompson comes back, we'll be ready." "How?" Abigail asked. "He has men, guns." "So do we," Riley said simply. And we have something else to the law on our side. Sheriff Briggs from Tucson should be here by tomorrow afternoon. I sent for him before we left for Prescott. Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. Will that be enough? It has to be, Riley said, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. One way or another, this ends now. The conviction in his voice steadied her. Standing in the circle of his arms, Abigail felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to determination. She had spent too long being afraid, first of her father, then of Gerald. It was time to claim the strength Riley had always seen in her. "You're right," she said, meeting his gaze squarely. "No more running." Riley smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "That's my girl." The phrase sent warmth flooding through her. "Your girl," she repeated softly. Riley's expression turned serious. "If you want to be," he said quietly. "When this is all over, when you're free, I'd like the chance to court you properly, Abigail Sullivan, to show you what a real partnership between a man and a woman can be." Abigail's heart swelled. "I'd like that very much, Riley Parker." His kiss was gentle yet full of promise, a glimpse of the future they might build together once the shadow of Gerald Thompson was removed from their lives. Sheriff Briggs arrived the following afternoon, a tall, lean man with a no-nonsense demeanor and a starred badge pinned to his vest. He listened carefully as Riley and Abigail explained the situation, including the statements they'd obtained in Prescott. "Thompson's playing a dangerous game," Briggs said when they'd finished. "Threatening armed men on private property, that's asking for trouble." "He's desperate," Abigail said. "He can't bear to lose, especially to a woman." Briggs nodded grimly. "Men like that are the most dangerous kind. But we have the law on our side here. Your divorce petition has been filed, Miss Sullivan. Until a judge rules, you have every right to determine your own residence." "Will you stay?" Riley asked. "When Thompson returns?" "I'll stay," Briggs confirmed. "But I should warn you, my presence might not deter him. Men in his state of mind don't always think rationally." "We understand," Abigail said, exchanging a glance with Riley. "We just want this to end peacefully if possible." They didn't have to wait long. The next morning, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced the approach of riders, at least 8 by Riley's count, as he watched through his field glasses. "Thompson's brought reinforcements," he said grimly, lowering the glasses. "Sheriff, you might want to make your presence known." Briggs nodded, adjusting his badge so it caught the morning sunlight. "Miss Sullivan, you should stay inside." "No," Abigail said firmly. "I'm done hiding. This is my fight as much as anyone's." Riley looked like he wanted to argue but instead nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Stay on the porch then, behind me and the sheriff." As the riders approached, Abigail recognized Gerald at the lead, his face set in lines of fury even at a distance. The men with him looked rough hired guns rather than business associates. Riley, Sheriff Briggs, and 4 of the ranch hands formed a line in front of the house, a clear message that the approaching party would not pass unchallenged. Gerald reined in his horse about 20 yards from the house, his men fanning out behind him. His gaze found Abigail on the porch, and his lips curled into a sneer. "There's my wayward wife," he called. "Come to take you home, Abigail." Sheriff Briggs stepped forward, his badge glinting. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Sheriff Briggs from Tucson Territory. I understand there's a dispute here, but it needs to be handled through proper legal channels." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "This is between me and my wife, Sheriff. The law gives me the right to retrieve my property." "I am not your property," Abigail called, her voice stronger than she felt. "And divorce proceedings have already begun. You have no right to force me to go anywhere." Gerald's face darkened with rage. "You ungrateful whore, after everything I've done for you." "That's enough," Riley interrupted, his voice cold with anger. You'll not speak to her that way on my land." Gerald's gaze shifted to Riley, hatred evident in every line of his face. "This is your doing, Parker, turning my wife against me, filling her head with nonsense about independence." "Abigail made her own decisions," Riley replied evenly. "All I did was offer her safety after you beat her on your wedding day." A tense silence fell over the yard. Gerald's men shifted uneasily, several looking less certain about their purpose here. "I suggest you turn around and leave, Mr. Thompson," Sheriff Briggs said firmly. "Any attempt to forcibly remove Mrs. Thompson against her would constitute kidnapping under territorial law." For a moment, it seemed Gerald might actually listen to reason. Then his hand moved to his jacket, pulling out a revolver with surprising speed. "I'm not leaving without my wife." Several things happened at once. Riley shouted a warning, pushing Abigail toward the door. Sheriff Briggs drew his own weapon. One of Gerald's men, apparently deciding he hadn't signed up for a gunfight with the law, grabbed Gerald's arm. The gun discharged, the bullet splintering wood near where Abigail had been standing seconds before. In the chaos that followed, several more shots were fired. Abigail, now inside the doorway, watched in horror as Riley dove for cover, returning fire. Sheriff Briggs bellowed for order, his authoritative voice somehow cutting through the cacophony of shouts and gunfire. Gradually, the shooting ceased. When the dust settled, Gerald Thompson lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder where blood stained his expensive jacket. None of the ranch hands appeared injured, though Riley sported a bleeding graze along his forearm where a bullet had come too close. "It's over, Thompson," Sheriff Briggs said, standing over the fallen man. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, among other charges." Gerald's face was ashen with pain and fury. "She's my wife," he insisted weakly. "Mine." "Not anymore," Abigail said, stepping off the porch to stand beside Riley. "And I never really was. A marriage built on lies and violence isn't a true marriage at all." As Sheriff Briggs and two of his deputies secured Gerald and his men, Riley turned to Abigail. Blood trickled down his arm, but his eyes were clear and steady. "Are you all right?" he asked, his free hand finding hers. Abigail nodded, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I am. For the first time in a long while, I really am." 3 months later, Abigail stood on the porch of the Circle P ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. The air had cooled with the approach of autumn, a welcome relief after the scorching summer. Behind her, the sounds of celebration drifted through the open-door laughter. Music from Sam's fiddle, the clink of glasses. Today had been a day of double joy, the official granting of her divorce from Gerald Thompson and her marriage to Riley Parker. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly once Gerald was arrested. His attempt to forcibly reclaim Abigail, coupled with the statements from Chicago and evidence of previous violence, had made the case straightforward. Gerald now faced charges that would likely send him to prison for several years. Soft footsteps behind her announced Riley's approach. His arms circled her waist as he pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Hiding from your own wedding party, Mrs. Parker," he teased. Abigail smiled, leaning back against his solid chest. "Just taking a moment to appreciate how much has changed. 6 months ago, I thought marriage meant pain and submission. I never imagined it could be like this, a true partnership." Riley's arms tightened around her. "You taught me as much as I taught you, Abigail, about courage, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult." She turned in his embrace to face him, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "Do you remember that day in Yuma, when you found me in that alley?" "I'll never forget it," Riley said softly. "You looked so frightened, but there was something in your eyes that told me you weren't broken, just bent for a while." You were the first person who ever treated me like I mattered, Abigail said, her voice thick with emotion. The first man who showed me that hands could be gentle as well as cruel. Riley took one of her hands in his, bringing it to his lips for a tender kiss. These hands will never know cruelty, I promise you that. Not from me, not from anyone else, not ever again. As the last rays of sunset gilded their joined hands, Abigail realized the truth of what Riley had shown her, that love wasn't about possession or control, but about choice and respect. Every day since he'd held her hand in that Yuma, Allie had been a lesson in what real love could be. Inside the house, someone called their names, beckoning them back to the celebration. Riley smiled down at her, his blue eyes filled with a love that still took her breath away. "Shall we, Mrs. Parker?" he asked, offering his arm. Abigail slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the strength and gentleness that had become her sanctuary. "Lead the way, Mr. Parker. We have a lifetime ahead of us." As they turned toward the warmth and light of the house, Abigail knew that whatever challenges might come, they would face them together hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word. 5 years later, the Circle P Ranch had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. Under Riley and Abigail's joint management, they had expanded their cattle operation, added horses, and built a reputation as one of the finest ranches in the Arizona Territory. The main house had grown too, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family. 3-year-old James, named for Riley's father, was now joined by 1-year-old Emma, a chubby-cheeked, blue-eyed girl with her mother's determination and her father's laugh. On this particular evening, Abigail sat on a quilt spread beneath the large cottonwood tree that shaded the yard, watching James chase a butterfly while Emma crawled determinedly toward a colorful ball just beyond her reach. Riley approached from the barn, his day's work completed, a smile spreading across his face at the sight of his family. "There's my favorite people in all of Arizona," he called, sweeping James up for a spin that elicited delighted giggles before settling on the quilt beside Abigail. "How was your day?" Abigail asked, leaning into his side as his arm circled her shoulders. "Good. The new breeding stock from Texas looks promising. How about yours?" "Busy but wonderful," Abigail replied. "I finished the accounts for the month, and Martha showed me a new recipe for apple pie that the children devoured." Riley chuckled, reaching out to guide Emma as she wobbled on unsteady legs, taking tentative steps toward her father. "That's my girl," he encouraged as she collapsed into his lap with a triumphant babble. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in familiar golds and reds, Abigail felt the same sense of wonder that often struck her in these quiet family moments, wonder at the life they'd built together, at the joy they'd found after such difficult beginnings. "I had a letter from Lucy Whittaker today," Abigail said, referring to the former Elizabeth Harrington, Gerald's first wife. The women had formed an unexpected friendship through their correspondence over the years. "She's remarried to a professor in Boston. She sounds very happy." Riley smiled, bouncing Emma on his knee. "I'm glad to hear it. She deserved happiness after what she endured with Thompson." Neither of them spoke Gerald's name often. After serving 3 years in prison for his crimes, he had returned to Chicago, a diminished man whose reputation and business had suffered during his incarceration. He had made no further attempts to contact Abigail. "It's strange to think how differently things might have turned out," Abigail mused, watching James, who had given up on the butterfly and was now constructing an elaborate fort from twigs. "If you hadn't happened to be in that alley that day in Yuma." Riley's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I don't believe it was chance, Abigail. Some things are meant to be." She turned to look at him, still handsome as ever despite the lines that hard work and Arizona sun had etched around his eyes. Who would have thought that the most frightening day of my life would lead to all this happiness? Riley leaned in to kiss her softly. That's the thing about life, you never know what's waiting around the next bend in the trail. As darkness settled over the ranch, they gathered their children and headed inside. Emma had already fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, while James trudged beside his mother, tired from his day's adventures. Later, after the children were tucked into bed, Riley and Abigail stood on the porch, his arm around her waist as they looked up at the star-filled sky. The ranch was peaceful, the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets the only sounds breaking the desert silence. "You ever regret it?" Riley asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of returning to town life. It's not an easy existence, ranching." Abigail turned to face him, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "Not for a single moment. This life, our life, is everything I never knew I wanted." Riley's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing her jawline. "You know what I think about every day?" he asked softly. "What's that?" "How brave you were that day in Yuma. How much courage it took to leave everything behind and trust a stranger." Abigail smiled, leaning into his touch. "You weren't a stranger for long. Something in me recognized something in you even then." Riley bent to kiss her, a kiss full of tenderness and passion that still made Abigail's heart race after 5 years of marriage. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the cool night air. "I love you, Abigail Parker," he whispered. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, her arms circling his neck, "for teaching me what love really means, not pain or possession, but partnership and respect." As they stood entwined beneath the vast Arizona sky, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a frightened bride fleeing violence to a confident woman who had found her place in the world, she had transformed not alone, but hand in hand with the man who had shown her a different way. In Riley's arms, on the land they had nurtured together, surrounded by the family they had created, Abigail had discovered the truth that real love didn't diminish but expanded, didn't confine but liberated. And though the path hadn't always been easy, every step had led her home.